Hello, everyone, and welcome to GRESB Like You Mean It, working smarter, not harder for ESG success. I'm Amanda Studerbond, a senior ESG consultant at Conservice. In today's webinar, we'll be discussing strategies for streamlining and improving your GRESB submission and achieving ESG success. We'll review the underlying ESG data, where it comes from, and how to acquire it. We'll share best practices for strengthening GRESB performance and examine how working smarter now can save you up for future success. We'll also identify the ways that data requirements for GRESB overlap with other ESG frameworks and how reporting to one can support and improve performance in others. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be distributed to everyone after the session. Second, we'll be saving some time at the end of the webinar to answer questions. If you have a question at any point during the webinar, you can submit it on the GoToWebinar control panel in the question section. We'll attempt to answer as many questions as we can, but if we don't get to all of them, members of our team will follow up after the webinar to provide answers. With that out of the way, let's have our speakers tell us a little bit about themselves and then get started on today's discussion.
Excellent. Amanda, let me start. Thanks for that introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Winters, Senior Director at GRESB. GRESB is the original ESG due diligence questionnaire. It's the benchmark used by the global institutional real estate industry. These are private equity firms or listed REITs from all countries around the world. And they benchmark themselves against the best practices, comparing themselves against peers. GRESB was started in 2009 by a series of institutional investors looking to understand the first and second order material issues that matter to them as they're putting, large allocations out the door. So we're going to talk about this and more today. We've had a very successful run to get here in 2023. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. We're looking forward to the decade ahead. Barry, let me turn to you.
Thanks, Dan. Barry Howard, founder and chief sustainability officer of Core Spaces. We are a national student housing developer, acquirer, and operator. We are in about 22 markets right now. In our third year, going into our third year of GRESB, I was originally the CFO of Core, but we saw the importance of ESG going forward, and I was able to make the shift about a year and a half ago to take this on full time, and excited to be a part of this panel.
And my name is Andrea Schoaf. I am an ESG manager at Conservice ESG, or Conservice, in the Conservice ESG department. I actually was a GRESB reviewer for a number of years, and then decided to come over to the consulting side and kind of use my knowledge to kind of help firms increase their ESG performance.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks everyone for that introduction. Want to get started, Dan, and tell us a little bit more and ask some questions to Barry?
So Barry, I'm often talking to folks asking, well, how do we get started? And so that's question number one. And then the question number two that kind of follows quickly after that is, what does GRESB compete with? And my answer to that is inertia. So right. So talk about that a little bit, particularly, you're as a finance professional. Tell us what it was like to in the early days of kind of getting started, what you learned, and we'll build on that conversation. Go for it.
Sure. Yeah, that first question, it's a good one, and the easiest answer is just get started. Sometimes a little momentum actually can build on itself. So we took year one as purely fact finding. We were a Swiss cheese organization in terms of there was identification of holes within the GRESB assessment. We didn't go chasing points year one. We were practical and said, hey, let's find out exactly what we are doing. And that's getting different divisions, different people involved, because sometimes disparate organizations sometimes maybe don't know what the organization is doing in every division. So we did some fact finding, but then we really took the time just to identify the holes. And that first year was really important for us, again, not to focus on getting the highest score we could, but to know what capabilities we had, identify the holes that we saw, and then really take a strategic approach to filling those holes. You can't do it all. We didn't want to go from a low score that we got year one to think we're going to be best. We wanted things that were authentic for what core did, and there were some natural things that were already organically happening with the organization that we could leverage. That way we weren't starting with brand new initiatives in each area. It was stuff that we were already doing, and we could just build and put a little bit more structure around them. Your second question is inertia, and maybe you go answer that. What is it up against? It's purely up against just getting organized. I mean, some of it is you're doing a new assessment. There's a lot of things that are coming at you that might not be asked in your role, whoever's actually filling that out. It's just fact finding again. Go out, ask questions, talk to the finance team, the legal team, the people team. A lot of things, and especially the corporate side of GRESB, touches different divisions. So don't be afraid to go out there and ask those touch points and start getting together kind of that framework of that, what's happening in your organization.
So you mentioned some things that you were doing, right? They were organic and authentic and whatnot. Can you give some examples of what those were when you were doing what's often described to me anyway as a treasure hunt around your organization? What sort of things bubbled up that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, well, the easy one is always E, and we'll probably get through this. The S and the G are sometimes not as prominent, but the E, we were already focusing, we were long-term holders of assets. Early on in core, we were more of a disposition model, but we started realizing that long-term hold, if you could focus on efficiency and sustainability, kind of looking at that, it really is a driver of NOI. So we were already starting to dial in what we call our outline spec, how we were developing, what we were doing when we bought properties. So that was kind of the low-hanging fruit of water, gas, electric, that kind of stuff. Some of the other things that was coming out of, the first one we did was in coming out of the original part of the pandemic. We had a mindfulness program, and this was something that we were doing to help ease the stress of people working remote, all of these pressures. And it was just something that we thought was right. It wasn't for everyone in the organization, we realized it, but it was this kind of bonding over Zoom and stuff like that of having some connection points in a time when there wasn't much connection. And so we realized that that's exactly what GRESB is. It's employee retention. It's attracting and retaining those best employees that you want, best candidates. And so we started thinking of things that, what were we doing that's kind of in the framework of GRESB, but was already kind of happening. We put it under my umbrella, and now we're actually magnifying many of those.
Wow, that's great. Andrea, does that sort of, does that square with how you, because you get to see lots of different companies. Does that sound about right? Are there other things maybe that are jumping in your mind?
I mean, no, I mean, that literally is kind of the most common thing that I hear from clients that are starting out. You know, for whatever reason, they've decided to start. Really, it's just getting through that first year. It's like a fact-finding mission. Exactly, Barry. You know, who needs to be involved? A lot of times people will task the ESG director, you know, hey, go do GRESB. And then everybody quickly realizes, like, oh, no, this is not a one-person job. You know, this is going to involve lots of different people in the organization contributing information. So really getting to kind of pick and choose who you need to talk to and who you need to go, you know, run down certain information from, and really finding all of those pieces. I think that definitely is a year one, whereas year two becomes a much more like, okay, we have all this now. How do we organize it so that it makes sense and we have everything together so that when we go through this routinely, that we have it all in one place and we can constantly build on it. It's not, you know, we're not trying to go find pieces again to build on what's already been started.
So let's talk about the routine. It's February 14th, Valentine's Day. We're halfway through the first quarter. The routine of GRESB is we do this on an annual basis. On April 1st, we've got a portal that opens and the globe pours into this. Last year, we had 1,820 participants. That made up 370 REITs, listed companies, to go along with 1,500 private equity funds from all around the world. So on April 1st, the portal opens and people work for 90 days, right? Second quarter, non-financial data. First quarter, we're working on the financials right now. Second quarter, we're going to work until July 1st when that submission deadline is due. So talk a little bit about the work that happens during the second quarter, and then we'll segue into what the third quarter looks like with the results. Who wants to take it? Maybe Amanda, Andrea, who wants to go?
I'm happy to take this one.
Go for it.
Go ahead, Amanda.
So I would say that GRESB is absolutely a year-long process. If it's particularly in your second year submission, you want to focus on what you didn't do last year and get it in before the end of the year. So that way, when you're going to the next reporting season, you've actually done something to improve your GRESB score. But on that same token, you don't want to do anything that is outside of that space, outside of what your business and operation does specifically, just because GRESB tells you to do something. It should be material to your organization. So I would use that 6-month period in between, 5-month period in between July and December to look at what you didn't get in GRESB the first year, what you could do for your organization in that 6-month time, and kind of build out a plan for a 5-year ESG roadmap. A materiality assessment is always a really great way of doing that. But I would definitely say there's work to be done after GRESB is completed. And we'll start work on that with our clients starting in December on that next year's submission. So there's always work to be done.
Amanda, you said 5 years. It sounds like such a long time, but I think the reality that we're seeing the data, because GRESB has these cohorts, right? We've got a cohort that started in 2009, another in 2010, 11, 12, right? And if you look at the slope of the line of the scores of these cohorts that are made up of like 50 participants and then 150 participants, each cohort's a little bit bigger, the slope of that line shows 4 years, right? You typically start off with a score that's in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and then it's all about, okay, we learned some things, right? To Barry's point, and Barry, we're gonna let you chime in a second. So we're learning some things, and then the idea that Amanda brought forward is we're gonna take it and we're gonna grow the next year. So maybe you take a 30 and turn it to a 45, because that's great, 50% improvement. Now 45, that doesn't sound like such a great score, but it really is at that point in time, right? You're moving and you know the answers that the questions where you're answering no, that oftentimes are really good business ideas, but have been battling inertia in that firm. So you start to work on them to get to yes, and then the 45 turns to 60, which turns to 75, and now you're in the pack. So Barry, that's what you signed up for. How are you doing?
Getting there pretty good. I'll compliment Amanda that her answer is exactly what we did. You don't wait until you get your score in October. We started finding those holes, especially year one, and started doing stuff. So we had enough time to plan and deliver it and make it, again, authentic. It wasn't just to go for the points. It was something that we were already doing or wanted to do. I'd also say that the idea of templates, a lot of the times when you do multiple year submission, you're going to submit the same thing or something, an updated version of each doc. So get things that are templates that you know you're already doing and is there, so you're not scraping to try to chase those down when the portal opens on April 1st. We actually have a place on our shared drive where we're depositing documents and supporting things throughout the year. So then that portal opens up and kind of that stuff that we've already done the past years is already baked, and we're already kind of there to submit that. And then we can focus on the other areas that were new, or especially the data side, that's where we're going to focus most of our attention in those 90 days.
So Andrew, talk about this a little bit, because you know that after the first year, which can be this treasure hunt and kind of some time consuming, a lot of work, but the second year when a participant comes into the portal, most things are preloaded. Those policies that have been uploaded, some data from the year prior, right? So talk about what the second year might be like, a lot easier, right?
Absolutely. I mean, as easy can be, because hopefully you are making changes, you are changing some of that documentation. So while yes, GRESB does a fantastic job of pre-filling some of the indicators so that you can go right on and say, okay, you know, I have my policies all here. You know, while we don't want to change policies every year, because that can get to be a lot, you know, there are going to be some changes. So there will be some changes that need to be made on the portal, but it is a great repository from year to year for keeping track of that data in the GRESB portal, you know, stuff that you can access whenever. But yeah, it definitely makes it easier, but the idea is that you are going to make some changes to that. So
let's keep going here, Andrea. What you're basically getting at is continuous improvement. We've seen back in the early days of GRESB that when people needed to come up with an ESG policy, they might say things like, well, we have recycling programs and we're doing double-sided printing, and that feels like we're crawling. And now we're going to walk, and now we're going to run. So that's where this continuous improvement in policies and procedures come into play. Give us some more on that.
So, I mean, really, it's kind of taking that first stab at low-hanging fruit, kind of after that first year, really seeing what the assessment is asking for. And I will say, sorry, shameless GRESB plug, GRESB does a fantastic job of asking for documentation in a way that is not like super specific. So it allows a company to kind of really tailor the GRESB question to their organization and how their organization is run. So it's not trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It's really like, what information do you have on this in whatever format you have it, and give that to GRESB, which is probably one of my very favorite things about the whole GRESB experience, is that it's not trying to make everyone conform to a certain thing. It's really trying to get at, what are you doing as an organization? What things are you doing as an organization that touches on the E, the S, and the G? And how are you telling people about it? How are you telling your stakeholders? How are you telling your tenants? Which really gives everybody a lot of leeway to deliver that information to GRESB. So, I mean, that's kind of, it makes it seem very broad, and there is some documentation requirements, but as with that foundation, it really lets people be able to evolve their program in a way that then they can just add some more onto what they've already had. So again, like that second year is really like, where do we have these big gaps? And where do we want to focus our time? Like, yes, we have this thing over here that may get us 3 points, but that's a really big lift for us right now. We're not there as an organization. But there's 2 or 3 other things over here that we're already working on in some capacity. We just need to get a little more information. Like next year, let's go after those. Let's touch base with, the head of HR, the head of development, whoever we need to have this conversation early so we can get that stuff into the portal. That's kind of what we see as the second rotation of GRESB.
So let's boil this. So what we've been hearing now is GRESB is best practices globally. What Amanda said is, look at these things, but don't necessarily do things for GRESB, right? You don't run off and just capture points because you want to. Make a business decision that's sound for you. GRESB allows some flexibility, and we do this on purpose. What we don't want to do is we don't want to GRESBify the planet. What we do want to do is we want to recognize breakouts, right? So I want to get back to Barry. Barry, you've got an interesting portfolio at student housing. And what is applicable to that sector is a little bit different than, say, a data center, I would imagine. So what we want is we want people to look at their business circumstance, look at the best practices that make up GRESB and say, aha, I know how this applies to us. Do something and cause a breakout. So then others in the student housing industry can look at what CoreSpaces has done and said, oh, that's the best practice now. And it's created this competitive race to the top. And as soon as we do good, that gets to better, that gets to best. Well, that's best in 2023. The people that are at better, boy, they want to be best in 2024, and off we go. Is that kind of where the mindset is right now, Barry?
Yeah,
For you?
I think you framed that well. That I guess my question is the why. We briefly talked about this before, like why are you doing it? I can say, well, our equity partner requires it. But while we're going through this effort, the why is actually to run a better business, to learn from this process and actually get a better NOI on our environmental or our energy side, figure out programs that are actually going to retain and attract the best employees. We're using this to try to define the why, and using that and leveraging what we're seeing from other people that others are doing, and leveraging that to improve our own business model. So while we're required to do it, we've actually turned the script and said, well, actually, we're doing this not only because we're required, not because we're required to, because we want to, and it's a better business model, and that will actually attract better equity in the future as well. Other people are doing this and we're one of the best. Well, there's gonna be a flight to quality, and we'll be that quality.
So what Barry just told us was, when he brought up the investors, I call that the nudge. That was the nudge to break through inertia, to get started, and now the why is appearing. All right. Amanda, what are you seeing out there? Similar?
Yep. Yeah, I would say so. I don't don't really have anything else necessarily to add.
So Amanda, can you keep us grounded a little bit there? There were some things coming into the webinar that we were going to touch on. I know data is a big topic, so we want to talk about wrangling that data and how to, assure it and make it as, timely and actionable, with lineage, right? All of those things are important to high data quality. What are some of the other topics that we're going to cover here today?
Data is a big one, as you said. Kind of talked about this before, but not just the environmental data. Talk about the social and governance data as well. We also want to talk about how to, let's see what else. Some strategies for where to find that data as well.
Talk about the data, and then keep guiding us here, Amanda, on where, on the question. So, Andrea, talk about Barry's problem. Barry's like, okay, we own 50, 60, 100 student housing. Where do we get that data from?
Data, I would say usually, and that's usually what we'll see in a first-time participant, is data. How do I get the data? How do we get our hands on the data that we need for GRESB? So, it's your electric data, it's your energy. Let's just lump everything together. It's your energy, your
water, waste, GHG.
Yep, water and waste. So, that's kind of the first thing is, okay, let's look at our portfolio. What can we get easily? And then what is going to be that next step of like, we have to go after. So, Barry, I'll use multifamily, student housing multifamily as an example is, a lot of times we get like core space data, and it's like, okay, great, we've got this core space data, that's great, we can put that in. But then you kind of start looking at, okay, so what's the next step in data? And then that tends to be the tenant data. So trying to like just think through, okay, we have this data, how are we going to get the next section of data? So I would say that tends to be the first to the second, as we were talking about. That first is like, oh yeah, we have some data here, let's put that in. And then you start to see where your holes are.
So Barry, energy, water, waste, GHG emission data for your portfolio. That's easy, right? Bingo, there it is.
Year one, we nailed it. No. Well, I mean, it's a small plug for Conservice, but we work with Conservice. I mean, we really had to find a data provider. The common area was pretty easy to get that data, our house meter stuff. If you look at the elephant in the room of energy is the tenant data. I mean, in student housing multifamily, the tenants are using more than the common by far. So to leave that out of it, I think you're missing a huge part of the puzzle. We also thought it was important that kids, the students that we have, our tenants we have, are looking at the overall cost of leasing a place. So if you get a reputation of a high utility cost market or building, that's going to ultimately hurt reputation, maybe hurt lease up. So we thought that there'd be really good importance for us as a business, but also for GRESB to actually get the tenant data. So we started working with Conservice. We got an addendum to all of our leases. Now our entire portfolios on the Conservice system, the Gobi S2 software. So now where we were struggling year 1 and 2, like literally in spreadsheets and spending time. It was I hate to say it, kind of a bad use of time. Now we're actually getting canned reports where we can get that data accessible, and it's taking a lot of that extra resources to get out. So we think that that's really smoothed things out for us on this third year.
Amanda, is it driving down people's costs, acquiring the data this way?
I would say so. I mean, from a billing perspective, I can't necessarily speak too much, but I would say
cost of the process. Right.
Yeah, it does say that. I mean, I would say that in general, you're seeing companies invest more into their buildings and their portfolios based on either feedback from the tenant or the amount of money that you can see that their tenants are spending on low efficiency properties. The other thing it does is it helps you understand where your portfolio is so you can make good acquisition and disposition decisions. It also sets you up for success, especially if you are getting that tenant data. I know this is a big push in more multifamily and single family spaces right now, that you'll be able to report to some of these maybe government entities that are now starting to get more interested in your scope 3 emissions, which is what tenant data would be captured under.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about the S. S is squishy, right? We talked a little, so for GRESB, there's two sides to this coin. One is what's happening at the firm. And Barry talked about, early in the pandemic, Zoom fatigue and bringing people together. And that was really about colleagues at the company. And that matters to the institutional investors that are entrusting capital with your firm to deliver returns and good product. The other side of the S or what's happening on the properties, right? Programs and procedures that benefit the ultimate community and the customer, if you will, the tenant in the building. So Barry, anything that you guys are doing that's unique, novel, and cool that you want to share with us?
Yeah, well, as a developer, this is probably where it's most prominent. All the communities that we're in, the people are very passionate, the residents of their community, and to come in and not take that stakeholder into consideration, you run a big entitlement risk. So what we do is we have some good programming in our buildings that's both for the tenants, but we also take a lot of time to have the interaction between the streetscape and our buildings, and we talk about that when we go for entitlements. It's beautifying it with great landscaping. It is accessibility. It is being able to have retail that makes sense for that community. We think through those things and we don't always get it 100% right, but at least when we have the conversations with the key stakeholders in the community, we've thought about it and have a dialogue. So it is this kind of, not collaboration, I'd say, but I believe it's more conversational than coming in any way contentious. Because if you come in just saying you're going to develop something and haven't thought of the community side, there's a good chance of entitlement risk or some risk of getting that project developed. Then just the second token is to do things well and good programming is really on the tenant side. That is, if you get a good reputation, again, reputation risk is everywhere. If you don't do that well, you're probably hurting your next year's lease up. So we always like to think of it that the best lead for a tenant is a referral from a friend. And so that's kind of how we go into those conversations. And if you're doing the S well on site, which we have events, we do some Fitwell certification, which encourages light and vent and access to bikes. We encourage people to take the stairs. There's all sorts of kind of token things, but on the aggregate, they add up to something that actually has some meat to it.
And I will say, I mean, what we're seeing just on, at the corporate level is people are looking for jobs with companies that are taking this seriously, that are doing these things for their tenants and doing these things for their companies. I know when I was looking for a job, that was very important to me, is that someone, that I worked for a company that felt the same way I do about ESG. And so I think there's a kind of added benefit as well, is, it not only does it benefit your tenants that are there, but, your employees or people who are looking for a job with your company are taking a look and saying, hey, this company, like, they practice what they preach. They really believe in ESG, and this is all the really cool things they're doing. Like, I want to work for that company, which I think is a really cool added benefit as well.
And I'll add one final touch to that point is vendors. So Barry, you touched on tenants, Andrea on employees. There's a whole other area of that GRESB touches on, is how do you as a company vet your vendors? And perhaps it's in a way that they're more environmentally conscious, more socially conscious, but it does add a layer to that to ensure that we're taking in consideration, we as in larger companies are taking into consideration all of the facets involved in our organization. So I think that's a key thing to add as well.
Just say a great one, just quick example. We have a Findorf, they're a GC out of Madison. They're awesome. We found really good synergies working with them because they are aligned with us in the ESG world. We just came up with a great additive to a concrete that cut greenhouse emissions on that body carbon by like 38%. And the team got jazzed about it. It was something that it was it was actually a no cost change, but to have that collaboration was exciting, and the team got to do it. We actually put it on a billboard on the front fence now because we were so proud that we did it. And again, it was a no cost solution, but if we had a different general contractor that really didn't look at the world we did, I don't think we would have found that solution.
Barry, I went to Madison. Where were you 35 years ago? Come on.
That's right. One of our favorite college markets though, man. It's a great town.
Let's talk about $100 trillion. $100 trillion have made net zero commitments, whether it's the Asset Managers Alliance or the Institutional Investors Initiative. Either way, $100 trillion are pointed at net zero 2050 or sooner. We've got CalSTRS here in the United States. They've got a 2045 target. I think New York Common Fund is even more aggressive than that. So people are pointing at that. What does net zero kind of mean to you right now? Where are we? Because the GRESB is making these advances. We're asking folks in the 2023 assessment, do you have policies? If you have targets, where are you? This is the conversation going into the rest of the decade. Barry, how is it resonating in your firm?
This is an area we're focusing on, but being honest, we have not figured out our exact plan to get there. I mean, it's part of the evolution. I would be foolish to say that we had a very strict plan with it. We are kind of taking the idea of our outline spec. We're doing a lot of on-premise solar that we're adding to some properties, and we're trying to figure it out. I know there's some other frameworks, and maybe Amanda or Andrea can talk a bit more about it. We're trying to find the right one to help us guide it. We realize that there's some economic side to our side to actually getting there, but Dan's point is, if you're doing the right things, you're going to attract that capital. And so that's where we'd like to make sure we're balancing those two things, both the Capex side, but then also being able to attract capital. And those two, I think with the right strategy, will marry each other at some point.
And I will say, Barry, I mean, sorry, Dan. I was going to say, Barry, I mean, you are headed in that exact right direction because you are capturing all of your data. And I mean, I would say at a bare minimum, you need to be, to even start thinking about net zero is you need to be capturing your data. You need to have a good plan going forward to capture your data, because without knowing what your data is, there's no way to get to net zero. You're making a lot of guesses to get there. And that's not kind of the base of that whole plan. Really, you want to have those base numbers. And so, Barry, I think just by the sheer fact that you have those numbers, you are like headed down the right path. But yeah, I think we are definitely seeing companies shift. I think we still are seeing a lot of companies, Barry, where you guys are right now is taking a look, not quite sure how to get there, but definitely want to get there and want to kind of take those next steps as far as what do we need to do.
And that's okay. It feels new, right? These initiatives and these pronouncements, if you will, really came about during the pandemic. 2020, 2021 have been kind of a push in this direction. Amanda, is this resonating with others that besides the core spaces and others that you're talking to? Where it's a journey, right? Any flavors here?
No, absolutely. I think everyone is kind of dealing with not just 2020 and 2021 outcomes, but also, the SEC coming down the pipe with their proposed rule in the United States. And having targets now feels kind of like a daunting task. But I think people are taking it in stride, getting together some real solid data. I think that in general, people are trying to do the right, companies are trying to do the right thing and find their baseline before making bigger sweeping targets that they might not be able to achieve. And then when they do come up with that baseline value, going back to the drawing board and saying, okay, it's been 2 or 3 years, is this actually achievable? Is this something that, maybe we did an error? So really having malleable targets can be helpful, and reviewing those targets annually is something that I think a lot of companies either should do or are doing.
And I will say, Amanda,
go ahead, Andrea, please.
I was just going to say, touching on that, reviewing annually, I think is so important, because I think it is daunting to say we are going to hit net zero in 10 years. That is such a daunting thing to say as a company. And so, no one's standing over you saying you must hit. Now, you may have someone standing over you in your company saying you must hit this, but really, I mean, any move in that direction is a fantastic move for the environment. So it's not like, oh, we meant to hit it in 10 years and we hit it in 11. The fact that you hit it in 11 is phenomenal. We're moving the needle in the right direction. So I think people get hung up on hitting, I must find that number. I must find how many years it's going to take us to get to net zero, which is great, but moving that needle a little bit at a time is the real win in my book. So reviewing it each year, I think, is key, because you may not hit it in 10 years, but that's okay. You may hit it in 15, but you've moved that needle each way.
So that's smart. And the playbook is pretty simple. Like, let's to your earlier point, let's benchmark and see where all the properties are. Amanda brought up, okay, well, you're going to figure out which ones are running great and which ones are not. And you're going to do some interventions down here. You might do some CapEx, some OpEx, CapEx. Maybe they need to be moved on, right? But either way, right? And then you're going to move this baseline up while continuing to get this. So the playbook is OpEx, some CapEx work, right? We're going to do the LEDs. We're going to do some boilers and chillers and whatnot, driving for efficiency. Then the next step is procurement of that energy. Go find green electrons from your utility. Not every utility offers this. The ones that are moving down the net zero pathway are very focused on changing their source when that contract for energy rolls over. And then finally, people are going out and buying RECs. Try to focus on the first three first, right? Drive demand for renewables. You can do it on site, but you don't have to. Right, that's what a lot of people say. Oh, I don't have enough of my tall office building, enough roof space to be there. That's okay. Go get some green power out there. Drive demand in that direction. Does that make sense, Barry? Are you doing something about right?
Yeah, you guys nailed it. I think that even buildings that we're buying that were built a few years ago, we're doing an energy audit, and so get a partner that you can do that kind of stuff with efficiently. We're doing some CapEx. I mean, it's like even on buildings that are a couple of years, the older ones is obviously easier, but we're still finding that it makes good business sense as well. Like we're driving NOI through cutting out electrons out of our portfolio. One other tip that I think that we've been doing pretty well is piloting projects. So we got our whole portfolio. Don't try to do new technology or something, roll it out across the board. We're doing one, it's turn type, it's a MEP system, an HVAC motor. We're just doing one pilot. Let's get it, assess it. It's a little bit of the CapEx. If it proves it out, roll it across the portfolio. So we're using our own properties as guinea pigs, and the ones that work, then we roll it out, and then all of a sudden that electron that you're saving on the property to the pilot can roll out across the entire portfolio. So there's still enough work, and there's still new technology and things coming in. Bots, building automation systems. There's things that you can get on that CapEx that really do drive efficiency, where we're not even at the RECs point yet, because we're still finding ways to get more efficient just within the building framework we have.
Something that we're seeing in GRESB larger, right? In North America, the Canadians are definitely leading the pack. And so some of their groups, what they've done is they've pushed down to their local real estate operating companies. They said, okay, we need a plan. By the end of 2024, we would like all of the properties that we have a joint venture agreement with you with to deliver your plan for this asset to get to net zero. You don't have to do it today. We don't even need the plan today, by the end of next year, but come up with the plan. And by putting all those properties on notice, there's a lot of people out there that are investigating, interrogating the data, and trying to determine what it looks like to get there. And that's a great first step, for sure.
And just another note, your energy procurement, we are doing that in deregulated markets. It's a great win. Sign up a 3-year contract, buy green power. We ended up saving money for our baseline, and it was just a great way to kind of drive that number.
And Dan, I was just going to drive home your point where you said, focus on the building improvements first, focus on those before just, throwing green power at it or buying RECs. So many times we've seen companies who are ready to put solar panels on the building, and it's like, before you go down that path, try to get your buildings as efficient as possible. That is where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck with your money. Then once you're there, then start looking at kind of bridging that gap. So I really wanted to just drive that point home that you made.
From a GRESB scoring perspective, I do want to add one little note to that. And that's if you focus on the larger part of your portfolio, maybe your portfolio makeup is 70% high-rise office buildings and 30% retail or something. If you focus on the bulk of what your portfolio is, it will have a larger impact, one, theoretically on your overall portfolio consumption, but also your GRESB score. So keep that in mind as you're going through, but I just wanted to plug a little GRESB score advice in there.
But I'll bet that also leads to better business outcomes, because that bigger asset has a bigger impact on the NOI of the portfolio, right?
Absolutely.
Let's shift. Let's talk about climate resilience, climate damages, right? Since 2016 in the US, every year, $100 billion or more in climate damages across the country, right? And we've seen fires and floods and ice storms and all of this. Let's talk resilience. Barry, what's on the mind of your firm and your portfolio when it comes to this particular topic? Because it can vary, right? Well, the issues in Madison are a little bit different than the issues in Denver, right? Or wherever.
Yeah, we're in the hurricane belt in the southeast, and then also just the water and heat parched southwest. So our thing starts from the day one, whether we're going to do development or acquire. We do a climate risk assessment. So that is looking at heat stress, water stress, major storm stress, that kind of stuff, and we'll actually come up. There's some great websites out there that can help you kind of come up. We do a lot of that internally. When we do our property condition report or property condition assessment, we have a third party do it for acquiring. But you get that in there, and then we got a great internal risk management team that's really been built up over the last year. So they work with us, the development team, to see if there's anything we want to future-proof for or get planning on a Capex standpoint. A lot of it so far, luckily, we haven't been hurt by extreme events. But last year, Hurricane Ian did affect five of our properties. So we had a great risk manager, Heidi Munch, to give her a shout out. She had an individual plan for each of those properties. And so we were able to keep tenants in the site, didn't evacuate, wasn't required, but all of them were able to operate. Great communication, things like bottled water, all those things were thought of ahead of time. And that's just all part of that planning to make sure that, again, it's a risk mitigation factor. We didn't necessarily get accolades and do something positive. We just avoided something bad happening. In terms of future, what's that?
I was just going to say, we had the resilience module in GRESB that lived for 3 years, and it's baked into everything, all of the questions, but it was exactly driving to your point, which is have a plan, and have a plan not just for building A, but for all buildings. So sorry I interrupted you, please roll.
No, it's all right. I was gonna say, we haven't gotten to the thing where the Southwest with water scarcity, we've done like smart irrigation, low flow toilets, that kind of stuff. But you can feel some of the pressures coming, longer streaks of heat waves and stuff. That's actually impacting our replacement cost of, say, an air conditioner, condenser. So we're trying to figure out, and again, use data. We're not there yet, but I think in the long term, we're going to understand that air conditioner used to last 15 years, now it's 12 because of that 100-day temperatures is 50 days versus 30 now. And so we're starting to think through, how do we operate our assets in this long-term hold and prepare for extreme climate like that?
Interesting. Amanda, Andrea?
I mean, no, I would say, it's an interesting topic, because I'd say about 5 years ago, maybe even longer than that, you were hearing all about insurance. It was not about kind of extreme weather. It was more about maybe flooding, depending on the area you are. Extreme weather if you're in, like the hurricane belt or something like that. But it was kind of solely around this insurance and kind of insurance risk. So it's definitely very interesting to see that move towards, we are getting into these things where before it might not have been a risk, but it is a risk now, or we are having more cold days, having more hot days, depending on, where you are. So just having that plan, before it was just insurance. Yep, we're insured. If something happens, we're good. Now it's like, no. Now it's more about the tenants in the building. Like, what happens if? Do we need to evacuate? Oh, go ahead, Dan, sorry.
I was going to say, last I checked, an insurance contract is written for a duration. Sometimes it's a year. And then when that contract is over, maybe you can reinsure with the same insurer. I doubt the price is going to be the same. Maybe that insurer goes away. Either way, relying on insurance feels like you better be eyes wide open.
Absolutely. So taking it that next step and really realizing what's going to happen and how do we take care of our tenants when they're in that situation? How do we get them access to water if they don't have access to water? How do we get them out of the building safely if there's something that happens and we have to evacuate? I think, that goes a long way for tenants looking for a place when they have a company that they can rely on that says, this company's looked into this. Heaven forbid if something happens, we're okay because I know this has been thought about and that there's a plan. I may not know what that plan is, but there's a plan.
I'd say the clients that I've worked with, the accounts that I've worked on over the last year have had varying degrees of robustness on a climate action plan, risk mitigation plan. So it just goes to show you that everyone's kind of on their own pace from an ESG perspective. But it is interesting. I find it kind of a correlation that those companies that have a more robust climate risk management program or are thinking about it very specifically and intentionally have a more robust ESG program overall. And I think it might just be a product of climate being kind of a scary little monster on the other side of the room that you're like, I don't really want to deal with that, but I know I should. So it might, just be the last thing people touch.
Important but not urgent, inertia, all of those things make up this ESG. So I've got a question for Barry, which is pretty, but while I'm doing that, Amanda, take a look at that agenda, make sure that we've covered those things. I want to know, because I've got the privilege to ask lots of questions, if others have questions for us or even for me. So yeah. Take a look at our agenda. Barry, my question to you is this: what's got you excited right now on ESG? Any cool programs or forward things as you're looking to 2024, 5, and 6? What are you excited about?
Well, this is very specific, and then it's probably what you're looking for, hopefully, is the Inflation Reduction Act. We work with a lot of pension funds and areas that investors that maybe couldn't take advantage of some of the past programs, and with this transferability, we're hot on premise solar. So we think that is a great next step that the IRA really supercharged that. So we think that that's an exciting way to both, help with good returns in many markets, but also really reduce your greenhouse gases. And then being in the tenants or the student space, we think it's a market differentiator. So we're really liking to roll that out, being part of our lease up. And one fun example is we're going to hopefully have one that actually in the lobby you walk in, it's going to have a dial telling you how much power is being generated for the building by solar power. And just think of it's token, it's small, but like people are thinking about this, and especially younger generations. So we'd like to market it, and it's also doing something good for the building and for the globe.
And what a great marketing tool too. I mean, you're hitting on college kids are seeing this. I mean, they are going to be out looking, going for jobs, and like to get them into a space that is looking at this stuff, just kind of hopefully lights their fire. And as they're starting to look for jobs, they're like, hey, remember all that cool stuff we had in our apartment back when we were in college? Like, let's look at something like that.
And I think that is the interesting thing. Probably the big theme is just the electrification of the economy. I mean, there is a seismic shift that hasn't happened since horse to car or horse to transport. And so this is happening. We're doing some all electric buildings, and it's fascinating to see how that is evolving and how quick it's coming. And it's really coming from the regulatory standpoints where I'm seeing it the most. That areas like the state of Washington is entirely gone gas-free and for certain size building. And so you're seeing a real shift that way. So we look at this again as a risk management. That's kind of our theme of ESG, though, is if we're not getting ahead of the technology, we're not understanding how to underwrite this, not understanding how to build these buildings, that there's some serious long-term risk that we're going to be behind the ball. So as this comes, we don't necessarily want to be bleeding edge, but we want to be commercially viable solutions, putting that into our buildings so we're ahead of it. We're not behind the regulatory and also consumer sentiment curve. If we're the one that's got a coal or something like that, it's not going to be great to our tenants. So we're trying to again play those two sides.
Excellent. How are we doing, Amanda?
We're doing well. We got through all of the topics that we discussed, which is fantastic. And we have a few questions in the chat that I can ask of all of you if you'd like. We had some interest in the topic of tenant data. So can we give an example of tenant data, and how have you managed the relationship between the tenant and collecting that data? I know you said you used Conservice, Barry. We've seen potentially other strategies as well, depending on the property type. But it's mostly around how to get tenant data, what examples outside of meter reading and utility data might we have as well. Kind of couple.
Yeah, so we've always done where now, or we've been shifting over to where we have we sub-meter, especially electricity is what we're talking about student housing. We don't do any gas. We have all electric appliances and stuff, but so the electricity side is a sub-meter for each tenant. And so what we've done is aggregated all those together through Conservice relationship, where all of the utility accounts are in our name, and Conservice is able to organize that. And so when they pay their lease for the next month, it includes their utility bills, really electric in most cases. So it's nice and bundled. We pitched it as just this is an easier way to do it, where you're not forgetting to set it up, and they turn off the lights a few weeks into school. We're also looking at just for an ease of payment. When I went to school, we were cutting a check, splitting it by 4, and putting it on a tack board, and someone would mail it in. Well, now it's just all on your lease bill. So we've actually pitched it less about the environmental side, even though we're starting to talk more about that, but more just from the convenience side. This sets up, it turns on when you start your lease, it turns off when it's over. You're not paying for any days that you weren't there, and you're not going to have a risk of it being shut off, and it's just the ease of payment. So we've tried to just make it where that convenience is king in a lot of today's vernacular. So we just pitch it as that, but then we get that added benefit of greenhouse gas emissions and overall electric use. And that again helps us eventually. I think we'll be able to package that in an interesting way. We're thinking of tenant behavior, because again, that's the line in the room. Can we impact tenant behavior with the data have? Can we gamify tenant behavior? Can we do stuff like that? So there's some interesting things once you have the data that if you get creative, you might be able to do some fun stuff with down the road.
The other piece I was going to mention is outside of the multifamily space, I think one of the biggest challenges that the accounts that we've been dealing with are coming up with is how do you get a tenant who owns who has a lease of 10 years to provide you with that data. And oftentimes, that could be a warehouse that's a 10-year lease, that could be a government contract that's that long. So, green leases are a really good place to start, and incorporating those as your properties turn over. Green leases could include a clause about your tenant requiring
All right, typical map cat zoom. There's Parker.
About requiring your tenant to send the utility bills over time. So a few different strategies depending on your portfolio composition. But I think, not to, plug Conservice too much, but as a provider of the service you are talking about, Barry, I think that's a really good method of.
Tenants love that their one-click payment. So they're paying the utility bills and their lease. I mean, it's a pretty easy sell.
Yep.
And I will say, I mean, it's never easy. But the sooner you start, the sooner you can get that mass quantity. Because you can't just step in when someone's been there for 2 years and say, hey, now I need all of your data. And they're going to look at you and go, no. I mean, maybe they'll give it to you. That would be awesome. But, as those tenants and those leases turn over, you start to kind of build up that snowball effect of, you'll have 1, you'll have 2, then you'll have 5, then you'll have 10, then but it does take some time. So it is something, if you are thinking about it, start sooner rather than later, because it does take some time to, if you are going the green lease route to get your full portfolio.
Totally understand why student housing, you don't want to do the Lowtech thing, which is take photos of meters. I'm aware that if you've got single or a low number of tenants in buildings, this is a Lowtech strategy that people are following to acquire some data. Ultimately, what institutional investors are looking for is, hey, we have invested in these 4 walls and a roof. What's happening? What does that look like? I understand that maybe the contract, they're called the lease, as a portion of responsibility, but we want to understand how competitive this building is or isn't when the time comes for the next tenant to come in. That's the game, right? So high tech can service, low tech phone, either way, get the data.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another question that came in. What are the most impactful actions, strategies, or services you've seen implemented to improve GRESB scores? It's kind of a broad one. We've talked about a lot already.
Well, I think if you want to talk, Dan, it's weighted, what, 70-30 performance to that. So I think that focus on the buildings. I mean, it's really good to have the background stuff on the corporate level, but the buildings weighted average is much higher. That's 70% of the assessment. So I'd say focus on there. And then I think Dan had said it before, once you get your data, focus on your bad actors. I mean, if you have some portfolios that are things that are not happening, we use Energy Star. Portfolio Manager is awesome because you can compare it to other, not just in the GRESB assessment, but then other ones that are not in GRESB. And so we focus on ones that have too high of energy use intensity and are able to try to analyze those and focus the attention to those.
That's smart. And especially on the journey to net zero, right? We're all looking to say, what are the EUIs that are running? What are the buildings that are hot? What are those high EUI buildings? And let's do some focus on those. The ones that are running well, we're gonna, de-emphasize them for now, right? And focus on those other ones. Yeah, Andrea, you seeing some things out there? I can't really comment on specific technologies, so I gotta kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Barry. I mean, you see such a wide variety, like people come in at very different levels as a first time participant. Some may have management down really well, but need to work on performance. Some may have performance down really well, need to focus on the management section. So it's hard to pick like one or two that's like, oh, everybody needs to do X, Y, Z. But I'm with Barry. If you are looking for the biggest bang for your buck, it's going to be in the data coverage around your building utilities.
Yeah, and one little aside comment is getting leadership buy-in. So if you look at this just as an obligation and it's just a few people working on it in a vacuum, you're not going to get the organizational buy-in. So we had our exec team understand the why. And it was not only because we require, but because this is a better way to operate our buildings as a benchmark we can compare to ourselves, to our competition. And so we got buy-in from the top, and that helped us actually drive some initiatives that I think if we didn't have that buy-in, wouldn't have gotten done.
The biggest change we've seen is in Americas is the targets. So having a target, I am confident people have IRR and NPV targets, but having that GHG emission reduction target doesn't have to be net zero, right? Some people start out tepid, 10% energy reduction by 2026. Okay, well, what does that do? That makes you figure out where you are today and go for 10%. And most people spike the football in the end zone, to use a Super Bowl analogy, because that was 2 days ago. They spike it because it's like, yeah, we got there early. Let's get more aggressive. And so that's been the dynamic, the behavioral dynamic that we've observed here over the past 2, 3, 4 years. Amanda, what you got? And then take us home.
Yep. Yeah, I've got just one final thing to add to that point is that ultimately your investors will be seeing your GRESB submission, and you don't really want to do anything that you don't want your investors to ask about. So if you're not ready to set targets, if you are not ready to create a net zero policy, don't just create one for the sake of creating one. Your submission has to pass kind of the investor laugh test, if you will. So that's my biggest piece of advice is do things intentionally, and make sure that you're okay with your investors seeing some of that information.
And that's at the same time, if I may, nobody's laughing, right? What people want is they want better. And that's right. So it's a baseline where you are, and then look at those best practices and determine which ones are for you to tackle in 2023, 2024, 2025. You don't have to boil the ocean. You just have to make progress.
Yeah.
All right.
Excellent. Well, I don't know that we have time for one more question. So if that's it, I will take us home here. This is the conclusion of our webinar. The recording will be distributed within the next 24 hours. So if you have any additional questions for our speakers, feel free to reach out. We're all happy to help. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great discussion, team. Thank you.
Great discussion. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.